You're listening to episode 178 of the Writing Life podcast from the National Centre for Writing, a weekly podcast for anyone who writes. I'm Simon Jones, and it is the 18th of January 2022, here in Norwich as I'm recording. On the show today, we have Lucy Van Smit. Lucy is an award-winning author, screenwriter and artist who's worked internationally for NBC News, has made documentaries for Canadian TV on writers like John le Carre and Ian McEwan, and in 2018 her debut novel The Hurting won the inaugural Bath Children's Novel Award. She's now put together a writer's journal workbook for writers and artists, which is jam-packed with bite-sized exercises and tips for dismantling writer's block, improving observational skills, developing characters, and much more. It's designed to help new writers get started, find their voice, and improve their skills. I talked to Lucy about her own struggles with writer's block, which she experienced after publishing her first novel, and how creating the writer's journal helped her as much as anyone who might actually pick it up and read it. Even better news is that we have a discount for Writing Life listeners, courtesy of our friends over at Bloomsbury. Until the 1st of March 2022, anyone in the UK can get 25% off the workbook as long as you buy through the Bloomsbury website. The code is AWJW25, and you'll find a link to the book down in the show notes. Okay, so here's me chatting with Lucy. Lucy, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Simon, for inviting me. I'm thrilled.
No, not at all. So we're here to talk about a writer's journal workbook, which is coming out at the end of this month and is a hefty book that covers so much ground. I've been going through it and doing the exercises, and I was curious about when you start putting together something like this, how do you decide where you're pitching it? You know, what kind of writers did you have in mind when you were putting this together?
I think originally it came out from an observation of how anxious writers were, that I'm seeing very successful writers. And I really looked at this sort of conundrum where when we first start to write, we have this sort of just exuberance and we love it and it's thrilling. And I was seeing writers lose that love of that passion. And I really wanted to say, what if we could turn that boat around? So I started from a premise of let's help writers to thrive. So it was very much aimed at the writers in my life, but also an emerging writer. I just thought the greatest gift a writer has, a beginner, is there a potential to have a childlike approach, to be unself-conscious, to play, to see life with awe. And I wanted to recapture that sense of that creativity for a beginner writer and say, these are some of the mistakes I see writers make. A lot of them have to do with neuroscience and very simple things that we are making mistakes. You can avoid that. And just to keep your attention and focus on the things that light you up. So a writer, I think, often we push ourselves to write. And we've got busy lives. You've got kids to get off to school. You've got to go to work. You're exhausted. And sometimes the last thing you feel like doing is writing. And if an actor approached their play that way when they went on stage, they would just freak out. And there were a lot of techniques from that just help us overcome our fear, like the fear of the blank page. Great tip from Ewan McEwan to actually look at it as an old friend, and you're slightly changing. It's just a tilt on the lens on what you're looking at. So instead of things being always scary and unknown, you actually sort of lean in, and it's curiosity and excitement and awe. So it's just such a gentle kindness approach.
Yeah, and I've definitely noticed that the book puts a lot of effort into you've identified all these pitfalls and you kind of dangle ladders down to people who have fallen into them almost. And the book is full of exercises, like all the way through. It's a very practical, interactive kind of workbook. It's not something you just read. You're actively challenging the person who's going through the book to be part of it as well. Quite often, some of those exercises can be a bit challenging, and then you turn the page over and you've already kind of got something ready for someone who maybe has had trouble with it, and you've got another exercise or another tip or something to kind of help them get over those hurdles that they're going to be bumping into.
Yeah, I think that was really deliberate. Luckily for me, writers and artists yearbook are very practical. They wanted the book to have prompts and the workbook. I had come at it at a different approach. I had come in it as journaling. My core belief is that we can really help writers I had bonkers writer's block after my first novel. And I didn't even know we could regulate our anxiety. I, I had to learn all those skills. I didn't know that a lot of things that we do as writers make us very anxious. Like even now, the screen being 12, 15 inches away. In neuroscience, we're focusing our attention. And back in the day, when you focus like that, we only did that when there was danger. And it makes us anxious and we hold our breath. We have all these habits that are so simple to fix if we know what we're doing. So yeah, I did come at it on a multi-dimensional level: the neuroscience, the acting, spirituality. But for this book, writers and artists were very clear: it's practical. Give them an exercise. So I use writing techniques to do spiritual things. So the very first exercise is called the naming game, and that's designed to make you present, but through your writing, not woohoo, but just look up what you see and start naming things. And I don't know if you tried it, but when you try it, you start feeling very present, and you actually sort of calm down in your body. You can feel your body calming down.
I really enjoyed those exercises actually, because the book starts off from the point of view of addressing people who are not yet writing or who are maybe struggling to get writing, and I'm quite fortunate in that I find it relatively easy to write. Obviously, how good the writing is a whole other matter. So I was kind of like, I'm not sure if these exercises will apply to me, but I started to give them a go. And as you say, you kind of slip into being so much more present in your surroundings and observing stuff that you didn't realize was there, even if it's, I was doing it in my kitchen, which I'm in every single day. And then you start doing these exercises and you're like, oh, I didn't know that was there. You start spotting all these different bits and pieces. I think, the first, third of the book is very much about kind of unlocking someone's observational skills, which then obviously will play into their ability to then write and set scenes and observe characters and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. And it's, I guess my background is an artist and a TV maker, a documentary maker. So observation is, we forget how useful it is. And it's what you notice about something and how you react to it that makes you a writer. And one of the gifts I think we can give emerging writers is to just explain to them that they're really important, what they think matters, not what somebody else says, what they think. And it's, the intention is to connect a writer to themselves, a really sense of being grounded in who they are. So again, it weaves in. It's sort of like I wanted to repurpose an emerging writer's life skills, so they don't come to it. Yes, there might be a beginner, but as my son would say, being a beginner doesn't mean to say you're stupid. You don't need a dumbed down book. What you need is to see, oh my goodness, I can do this, and I have it. I have all these skills inside me I can use for writing. And a lot of the skills that you use at the pub, you can apply to your characters. What do I see? How do I feel about this? What do I notice? How does this make me feel? And that understanding that what is specific to you in your life, however tiny, the more personal and more in it you can get, the more universal that appeal is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what sets this apart from other, practical books is that it's as much about the writer as it is about the writing. And your approach is very much that you have to have both of them kind of functioning well in order for something, a book to come out the other end. You can learn all the techniques and the theory that you want, but if the writer as a person is not quite in the right place, then it's going to make everything harder.
Yeah. And I think also I did it the wrong way around. So I learned a lot about craft. I geeked out on it. But, I spent 12 years doing like screenwriting, every book. Every conference, every festival. I went to everything, read everything. And I think you can end up with all the skill and nothing to say. So we start at the wrong end. And the premise for the was really, what if we look at our life through the wrong end of everything? What if meaning and purpose for a writer are easy to find? It's not difficult. It's actually present in every moment. And that's why one of the exercises in the book, I absolutely adore the poet David Whyte and his poem Start Close In. And it's, again, this whole theme of the book is start close in on yourself, observe yourself, notice. And it's that sense of you have to champion yourself as a writer. And you have to be rock solid in yourself before you even think about getting published, because you're suddenly going to be, it's like getting into the dating game. And people are going to look at you saying, "Oh, don't like your nose. Oh, can you lose the beard?" And you'll lose yourself if you're not grounded in who you are. You will have hell as an author. You know this. You've seen it. And what I noticed about some of these exercises is you start to becoming really present in your everyday, and you have this sort of gap between the nonsense going on in your head and this other side of you that's the writer, the observer. And you start seeing this space, and you're sort of connecting to a much, much deeper side of yourself. So whether you want to call that your soul or just the inner writer.
Yeah, and I think what works really nicely is that it's all very bite-sized as well. What we've been talking about in the podcast so far, it might sound a little bit heavy, but it's really not.
Yeah.
It's
No.
very easy. It's really fun to get into. You can sit down for 10 minutes, do an exercise. Each page has a little bit that takes you slightly further, accumulates your knowledge and your observational skills over time. It's not like you give someone an assignment that's going to take them days to do. Every time you open the book, you feel like you're getting something done.
Yeah, the whole, and this, thank goodness again to the Writers and Artists Yearbook, because they, you can see I can go off on one, but they said, no, bring it back. What is one thing? The premise is a little know-how keeps you going very simply. And the great thing about writing one sentence is you start stitching it together, and suddenly you realize, oh, one sentence leads to this. If you break your book down into writing scenes, this is what a slightly longer exercise, might take you an hour, but suddenly you're stepping, and you've got your book done. And if you try to write the whole book at the beginning, you'd stop. So a lot of the exercises are as simple as the sort of, couch to 5K approach. Just write for 1 minute today, or put yourself 20 minutes, but write for one, rest for one, write for one, rest for one. And you think, oh, I can do that. And then tomorrow have a rest day and it's the principle of starting very slowly, but it seeps into you, and it's something that becomes a pleasure and a joy. So yes, childlike playfulness, all those things, looking at life and your writing and yourself with awe is the sort of really core to the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose something I haven't mentioned is the nature of the book, which is that there is space within the book for the reader/writer to write in. It's not that they have to go off and get their own journal or their own notebook. You write straight into the book. It reminds me of I've got some art books that do a similar thing, where you go through the book and you're scribbling into the book itself. And there's something immensely satisfying about that, I think, in that you just got this one object, and as long as you've got a pen or a pencil, that's all you need to start progressing through it. Is that kind of a writers and artists thing, or is that kind of something you wanted to do?
It was kind of a mixture between two of us. Writing into the book, I think, is really important, because what I didn't want to be is in relationship with the reader, the sense that I know more than they do. What I want them is to rip this book apart, scribble into it, react to it instantly. If you don't do it straight away, something will get in the way and you won't write. But if somebody's saying to you, stop right now, look up 1 minute, just write down, name what you are seeing, and notice what happens to your body instantly. Scribble in the margins, write your own insights at the end. One of the mistakes I made was all my insights were scattered in notebooks, and it just having that sense, keep it together. I did want a reader to close the book as a writer and say, I've got this. I don't know everything, but I know enough to start today and feel great in myself. I can do this.
It definitely challenges readers. It starts off gently, and very much anyone who is not yet writing or is experiencing any kind of block or difficulty, it leads them in a very kind way. But you definitely challenge people to look at themselves and their practice and everything from their personal setup to the aspects of craft that they do. So what you said earlier about it's not a dumbed down thing. It's not aimed at beginners in a simplistic way. It's very much you increasingly kind of get more and more under the skin, don't you?
Yes, and it was, my son is severely dyslexic and very bright, but he was always taught, if you have anything as a beginner, they teach you like you're an idiot. And he was very clear when we saw the first drafts of just the type layout. don't present this as if I'm stupid just because I'm a beginner. And the whole thing about being a writer is you have to have writing confidence. You have to be confident in yourself. Yeah, this is what I think, right or wrong, this is me. So a lot of the exercise come back to how do you get that sense of this is me.
That kind of approach of that mindfulness and kindness to yourself, and is that something that you have found through your creative pursuits and artistry, or is it something that you had to do in order to be able to be a creative person?
I had to learn it to be a creative person again. After the publication of my first novel, I hit a really awful patch of writer's block. I mean, I linked like a tsunami of anxiety coming at me to the point I couldn't walk up the stairs to my study, let alone sit down and write. The minute I thought about writing, I got terrified. And I had to stop completely what I was trying to do. And I also had a very bad accident. I had surgery and stuff. I had to learn to be kind and understand what is going on here and almost retrace my steps. And some of the most amazing things came out of writing this book for me. I mean, just absolutely transformational. One of which was curing my lifelong insomnia, which I've had for 60 years. And another was this sense always, I didn't know how to do things properly. And I could see in myself that I over study because I have this feeling I don't know how to do that properly. So I'll read one more book. And my biggest resistance was to know who I am myself. I will go read something on the Enneagram, a Briggs-Myers personality test. I will do anything to avoid looking inside. And that's what came about for me is I ended up looking inside. When you start breaking down your life and look back into sections, and for me, it was very useful to look at it in 7-year chunks, which is a Rudolf Steiner approach. So you look at your first 7 years. And when I looked at my very earliest memory, my first memory is being hit by my mother for not making my bed properly. I was 3 years old. I didn't think anything of it. I've always known that was my first memory, but I didn't know what it meant. And what it meant for me, and it'll be different for the first memory for anyone or early memory, is that moment time gets frozen. So that sense of you don't know how to do things properly got frozen for me. And I associated the bed with attack, an unwarranted attack. Um,
Mm.
and once I went back and looked at it, and this is what's so brilliant about being a writer, is we appear to have the most anxiety amongst creatives, and the studies show that. But you also, as a writer, have the greatest skills to rewrite stuff. And it's incredibly powerful. I just went back and rewrote that scene, literally like you'd write a screenplay, rewrote it. And you wouldn't think something that simple could transform your life, but it did. I don't have, it just completely transformed my life was using some of the principles in the book. Just look at yourself and just think, oh, and it's not blaming anything. I could give you 100 reasons why that happened from my mum's point of view. It's not about blaming. It's actually just seeing who you are and letting it go and realizing all my life I was driven by, I don't know how to do things properly, but it became a great strength. When I was in television, I wasn't a journalist. I hadn't done English. I'm interviewing authors and filming them, but I came at it as an artist, and it was a huge benefit. Not knowing something can be your greatest strength, and that's what I found. And that's one of the senses I wanted to give a sort of fellow writer is look what skills you have. You might be a vet, you might be a homemaker, you might be able to negotiate with a 2-year-old, which is a lot easier than your boss at work. You have these skills, and that's what I just wanted to get. So being kind, I was not kind to myself. I had to literally fall flat on my face before I started being kind.
Yeah, and as writers, we're particularly vulnerable to that, I think, because other creative pursuits often involve some form of teamwork. So you have other
Mm.
people there, don't you? And that can be a support, and it can help you see your place in the project and that kind of thing. As a writer, you're often in a room by yourself, just with you and your brain, and that can be brilliant, or it can be difficult, and all those frustrations that can come out and then get in the way of the writing as well. And the workbook does such a good job, kind of quite subtly, of giving the reader / writer exercises and ways to start thinking about some of that stuff.
And also what we don't have in a team, with a team, they can amplify your brilliance. They can say, hey, Simon, you're smashing it today. You did a great job. I can see this future career for you. You're going national. We don't have that in a room on our own. And I think one of the other things that causes a problem for writers is we have this myth that writing is about our brain and our mind, and we don't use our bodies. And every other creative person, whether you're a dancer or a musician, you are using your body as an instrument. And if you don't use your body, or you don't know how to use your body enough, it creates a much greater anxiety. And there's so much wisdom in your body, again, that when we tune into it a bit more as a writer, you can move further forward.
No. And a lot of that has been compounded in the various lockdowns and COVID, where
Yeah,
it's not just writers who are shut up in their studies
yeah,
or whatever. Everyone for periods have been kind of isolated and stuck in place. And
yeah,
like you were saying, your body becomes less relevant if you're not careful, because you have no need for it. You're just you're stuck in one building and can't do anything. But you have to make yourself go out for a walk or go and observe and have that kind of broader experience.
yeah. And walking, I mean, we've known forever about walking writers, from Wordsworth and way earlier. But the thing that's really interesting about walking for a writer is it grounds you. So often you might be up in your head in a way, but when you go out for a walk, you're grounded, connected back to yourself, back to the ground. And also, when you walk, your eyes move laterally. You don't even realize they're doing it. And it's that eye movement from side to side when you walk, that tells your brain you're safe. There's no danger there. You haven't frozen. You're walking forward. So walking is incredibly powerful for a writer. It also, there's a two-part process for your brain, that you effort in on the first part when you're writing. You might be struggling with a bit of writing, but that's only part one of how your brain works. The second part is how your brain organizes it, and you need to be totally relaxed for that. So if you struggle with something and then go for a walk, your brain will sort it out. And I could go into the neurochemicals, what's actually happening, but instinctively writers know that. And if you, as a writer, every time you feel a bit stressed at the screen, just look up at the outside the window, let your eyes go panoramic, and you can feel your body calm down. And with some of the very simple techniques like the naming game, is you just become more, you notice, you're more observational about yourself, and you start listening to your body. Just to pick up from your earlier question about kindness, one of the things, if you come like I did from a sort of authoritarian background, is you dismiss yourself. You've learned to dismiss what you actually feel and think, and you also dismiss your own guidance. So even when stuff is coming in to you that you could use, you sort of dismiss it. And again, when you're much calmer and more grounded in yourself, you start noticing things and think, oh, that's the answer. And that's another thing I learned in the book, was it seems to be a lot about your intention to write, what you're trying to say, and asking a question and inviting that question in and paying attention to the answer, because it will come in a very different way to what you expect. And it is, once you start hooking all the aspects of yourself up, it's a completely thrilling experience. And it's something that you can set up and come back to your work the next day with joy, rather than that sort of grim feeling we often have, like, oh God, I should be writing, that awful voice in our head saying, I should, I should, I should. Well, what if you could set it up that it was a delight to go back to work? It's actually your greatest joy, and you're fitting everything in with ease. So yeah, I was definitely coming in with a sense of, what if we didn't have to grow through suffering? What if we could grow through joy and delight?
I mean, all of us at some point would have felt that joy and excitement of writing, because otherwise we wouldn't have got into it in the first place. But yeah, as you say, it's easy to kind of go off the path and lose track of that stuff. And I think what the workbook you put together does a nice job of, it's almost like a little map back to finding that kind of feeling that you would have had in the early days.
Yeah, and to keep tapping into that. So it's we obviously call it a journey, but it's almost like a spiral that you're always returning back to yourself. So you can go so far, but you're always returning, and it's to keep that sense of wonder while you're working. And very simple techniques like praising yourself. If you say, "Hey, Simon, good job. I showed up on time for that interview. I cracked it. I did my research." Praise releases dopamine and you feel better. If you criticizing yourself, you're releasing these other stress hormones, which actually have the effect that you don't want to write because you're going to associate the writing with discomfort and you
Yeah.
start avoiding it. And you can, it's such a simple thing, but you can turn that around. And I do think one of the reasons why writers can end up having a problem just with that lack of engagement with their own work is unconsciously we've made a neural connection with discomfort and writing. So I was trying to say, try this. It's simpler, but keep your eye on this. Keep your eye where you want to go. Don't keep looking at all the sort of, the bogeymen. Look where you want to go. And that's a driving technique. You don't, if you're avoiding a crash, you don't look at the crash, you avoid it. You steer where you want to go. And our writers need to do that. Aim, where do you want to go? Don't get lost in the woods.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the workbook is out January the 20th, and then what is next for you? So your first novel came out in 2018. Are you working on any further projects?
Well, I'm still under contract for a second novel, a children's novel. I also, for this project, ended up writing 2 books. I wrote a sort of more of a soul approach that I was absolutely fascinated by, but then I had to make it more practical for Writers and Artists Yearbook and very practical for, we know all this stuff. We know we need to exercise, we need to eat, we know all that, but we don't do it. So it's finding a way through the writing, how we can have a better life and be connected to the writing. So I do want to finish that book. I mean, it's written. I've got another novel, a young adult novel I've written. I'd also like to write a screenplay.
Yeah, no shortage of projects.
No shortage of projects. And actually, but my pressing moment today is getting my 20-year-old off to uni.
Oh, wow.
It's always fitting your life in, isn't it? But what I'm really grateful to Writers and Artists Yearbook folk is this completely sort of invigorated my love to write and be creative. And I'm forever grateful for that.
Yeah, well, it's funny because that's obviously the point of the book, and I love that it did that for you as the creator of the book as well.
And much more so than we had a very tight word count. We had a very tight word page count. So there's no fancy writing. I mean, we stripped it down to the bone. I could say one thing about dialogue, one thing. What's the most useful thing you would need to know about plotting? Something very simple. One of the best techniques I did learn, and it's so simple, is the difference between when you come at something like a mouse and an eagle. So if I had one tip for a writer, it would be write your first draft without stopping. It's something I've never been able to do, but I know it's the best way forward, because what happens when you keep stopping and editing, you become a mouse and you think you're working really well because you're editing, you're fixing. But actually what's happened is you've actually frozen, you're working on something a tiny scale, and you need to almost soar up above your writing again and look down on it and have a bigger picture and move forward and get it done. And I think often just remembering, go up when you're stuck, just go up, soar over the writing and just look at it. And I find often plotting, for me, I often use a huge, like a yoga mat, and put all the Post-its down and then stand up and look at it. And you get this sense of flow and energy and excitement. Whereas I absolutely love editing, but it's because I feel safe. And you have to be a bit brave.
I love the idea of soaring over your writing. That's wonderful. Well, Lucy, thanks so much for your time. And the book is full of brilliant exercises as well. So hopefully lots of people will go and check it out.
Thank you, Simon. And thank you for your wonderful podcast. It's such a gift for writers.
Thanks for listening, and many thanks to Lucy for coming on the show. I have a little bit of news myself. After 5 years of being at the National Centre for Writing and 178 episodes of the podcast, I am moving on to other opportunities. But don't worry, the podcast will of course continue under the stewardship of Steph, and we'll be switching to fortnightly for a while. If you want to keep up with what I'm doing, do come and find me at simonkjones.substack.com. Meanwhile, you can find out about everything the National Centre for Writing is up to over on Twitter and Instagram at Writers Centre, over on our Facebook page, and of course at our website at nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk. And that's where you can sign up to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and find all sorts of other amazing resources for writers. As a UK registered charity, the National Centre for Writing does rely on the generosity of supporters to help make our work possible. You can make a donation over on the website by going to the Support Us page. Don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks again, and keep writing.